Welcome to our lesson on taking a critical lens to the products that are produced by our cultures. And while I've assigned 4 readings, I'm going to mostly be pulling quotes from chapter 37, and then I'll be incorporating verbal quotes from the other chapters, giving page numbers, of course, for you to reference later on. So, I'd like to open up with the question, why do we need to tell counter narratives? I recently received an email in my University of Washington, Go Dogs, newsletter. I get an alumni newsletter sent to my inbox every day that says what University of Washington is up to. And, well, this is what I found. The University of Washington researchers found in 2015 that when searching for a variety of occupations, including CEO, women were significantly underrepresented in the image results. Google's search results are important because these results can change our world views. Since then, Google has claimed to have fixed the issue since 2015. Recently, have they? UW researchers showed that image search results for 4 major search engines from around the world, including Google, still reflect gender bias. So this is the screen capture of Google, what you would Google CEO United States. Let's see what the search results yield. Oh, look at that. Underrepresentation of women. 0 minority representation. Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me. There is 1, 2, looks like there's 2 people of color. So in 2015, when the University of Washington researchers found that women were significantly underrepresented in the results, a different University of Washington team recently investigated if Google has changed since then. Image search results in Google still reflect gender bias. A search for an occupation such as CEO yielded results with a ratio of cis male and cis female presenting people that match the current statistics. But when University of Washington, UW, that's what we call it, but when UW researchers added another search term, for example, CEO United States, the image search returned fewer photos of cis female presenting people. So we've got some gender bias in regular Google search. When you want to find basic information, the basic results are shown through an ethnocentric, male-centric filter. So let's look at a different filter, specifically the filter of my queen, Beyoncé. That's right. In her visual album, Black is King, she sang Rich in the Mind. That's why I'm making deposits. That's why we need to tell counter narratives, is to make deposits in our mind. Can't we all empower? Google search filter? Dang. It's time to realize that they'll never, ever take my power. So anyway, there are so many battles that are raging right now, and you don't even know because it's being filtered by the time it gets to you. So my next question is, are we at war? Are we at war? Let's see what the editor of our course textbook has to say in chapter 37. The big concept is that stories have power. Stories have the power to cure. Stories have the power to liberate. And stories have the power to combine reflection and action, or praxis. A concept that we learned from Paulo Freire. Stories have power. They have the power to create their own bonds, the power to represent cohesion, a shared understanding, and meanings. Let's see. The cohesiveness that stories brings is part of the strength of the outgroup. An outgroup creates its own stories, which circulate within the group as a kind of counter-reality. So we have the reality, which might be that the Queen of Sheba is a white woman. That's Hollywood's reality. Or that Japanese men look the way that Mickey Rooney did in 1961 with the fake teeth and the eyes pulled and the yellow face. It's like, that's the reality that people in Hollywood would have us think. You get to choose, do I accept this reality? You get to choose, do I create a counter reality? Because if you don't create a counter reality, know that the dominant group creates its own stories. Looking at you, Hollywood. The dominant group provides it with a form of shared reality in which its own superior position is seen as natural. Are we at war? Do our stories have a role in this war, in who's superior, who is seen as inferior? And is that the natural order of things, or is there a counter reality we can create? Because the regular narrative would have us believe that only one group of people gets to define other cultures. I like skipping ahead to chapter 49 when the student wrote, "Why does this government and media use white people to define Mexican culture and food?" It's a simple question, and it's not an offensive question. I think it's a factual, observational question. Why does this group of people get to define this group of people's culture, their food, their cultural products? Why? Why not the other way around? Why at all? Why does one group, why don't they stay in their own lane? Let's see. Stories are powerful. Parables, chronicles, and narratives are powerful because they destroy mindsets. The bundle, when I say mindset, I mean on the bottom of page 229, a mindset is the bundle of received wisdoms and shared understandings against a background of which legal and political discourse takes place. These matters are rarely focused on. They are like eyeglasses we have worn a long time. They are nearly invisible. We use them to scan and interpret the world, and only rarely examine them for ourselves. We are examining them for ourselves. This whole book is an examination of the lenses for ourselves. So what is the power of stories? Stories give us mind control over Debo. Stories are a way to destroy mindsets. What's a mindset that you would like to destroy? Is it the mindset that says there's only one way to create a sandwich and there's only one way to eat it? That's a mindset. That's not a fact. That doesn't defy the laws of physics. I can eat a sandwich in multiple ways, so there is no truth to that matter. What's a mindset that needs to be destroyed? Is it the mindset that creates a biased story, even if that story and that bias is unconscious? Some examples of mindsets that need to be destroyed. Mindsets that tell us what a burrito is and isn't. Chapter 49. Mindsets that repackage images to be more pleasing to corporate clients. Chapter 34. Mindsets that don't hire faculty of color because they say, the mindset on page 237, so that, my friend, is why minority professors have a hard time getting hired and have a hard time if they are hired. The mindset is, oh, well, we interviewed them and they weren't good enough. We tried. That's a mindset that needs to be destroyed. And it was. In the anonymous leaflet counter story, page 235. Wow, I wish I could spend an entire lecture on this one chapter, an entire class on this one chapter. My goodness. I'll tell you a mindset that needs to be destroyed. The mindset that says all Mexicans are represented by Frito Bandito. Chapter 34. If you read chapter 34, nobody wants to be represented by Frito Bandito. So who gets to represent people? Is it them? Who gets to represent the cultural products that they created? Is it them? Who gets to define our culture and our food? Is it me? Is it you? When we're defining cultural production, I really like the definition on the top of page 209, chapter 34, the reconstitution of individuals into consumers and populations into markets. So we have individuals are part of a culture, we eat food and yeah, that's awesome, that's special. But when individuals turn into consumers, now we're producing cultural production. When populations turn into markets, how can I make money off of what that culture is already doing? Now we're talking about cultural production. Looking at Hispanic marketing is therefore particularly revealing, same page, 209, of the relationship among culture, corporate sponsorship, and politics. And moreover, can illuminate how commercial representation may shape people's cultural identities, as well as affect notions of belonging and cultural citizenship. So the way that I identify myself and the way that you identify me, all that affects how I belong. That's right, you tell them, Naz. She's back there barking in agreement. Somebody's got to protect me from these squirrels. That's the story that she's telling. Are we at war? Because if we are, we're going to need a cure. And the cure is storytelling. Or as I shall sometimes call it, says Richard Delgado, counter storytelling. If you're interested in what my mind map looks like, this is my mind map for our lecture. Look at these arrows and chicken scratches. So this one piece of paper has all 4 chapters linked on here with page numbers somehow. So the cure is storytelling. Because are we at war? Well, I don't know. Do people have unconscious bias? Does that bias affect the way that people are given rights in society? Does that affect the way that people belong in society? Absolutely. Counter stories challenge received wisdom. Counter stories open new windows into reality, showing us that there are possibilities for life other than the ones we live. There are possibilities for Mexican American representation other than Frito Bandito, which is a very dirty, poor, low-class, undesirable representation of a human, and he represented an entire race and culture. So one culture says, this is the story we wish to present. That doesn't mean that all the other cultures have to sit there and take it. We can fight back. We can create counter realities, counter stories. Because are we at war with each other? Well, our stories definitely are. And as we have seen, our stories affect our mindsets. And so really when people go to war with each other, it's because they're going to war with mindsets. The mindset of, this is mine. You can't have any. That's a mindset. That's not a fact. It's not a truth. It's not physics. It's not science. It's a mindset. This is mine, and you can't have it. So we are at war. We are at war because the ethnocentric bias, even though it may be operating unconsciously, is still a danger to us. The danger of the ethnocentric bias, or the danger of a single version, a single story of an entire culture. The danger of a single story is that it translates to who gets to stay in power and the cycle of who gets to keep that power. We learned in chapter 36 and 49 that the danger of a single story translates to who gets to have power in law, contract laws, labor laws, and immigration laws. The danger of a single story translates to who gets to keep power as a citizen. And once you're a citizen, are you a citizen, or are you really, a part of a colonized community? Chapter 10. The danger of a single story translates to who gets to keep power politically and economically. Let's see, page 225. That was chapter 36. Oh, yes, that's right. Who gets to keep power? Who gets to keep political, economic, and immigration power? All we have to do is look at the Bracero program and Operation Wetback to see who gets to tell the story of who stays in power. And finally, the danger of a single story translates to who gets to stay in power with actual war. Looking at you, President Polk, 1845, in chapter 12. And not only does the danger of a single story translate to who gets to get and stay in power, this cycle of, okay, well, this group's in power, so we gotta make sure they stay in power. No one else can have it. On page 226, chapter 36, we see the culture in power. They can't just have power. They can't just exploit other people. The representatives of the United States economic interests showed the basic reason for their support of Mexican immigration. Employers of the Southwest favored unlimited Mexican immigration because it provided them with a source of cheap labor, which would be exploited to the fullest possible extent. So this ethnocentric bias, this bias of telling stories of who gets to have power politically, economically, legally, racially, the people who are telling the story, they're not only justifying that it's okay, but they're exploiting others to the fullest possible extent. Like, dang, we can't just have regular exploitation. It's got to be maximum exploitation. Golly, give me a break. In chapter 37, we read about the stock story on page 231. It was a standard event and a stock story that explains it. So we had the stock story, then we had a counter story and an additional counter story. One counter story didn't work, one counter story worked a little bit more. I wanted to give a real life example of a real life Black professor who went up for tenure at University of North Carolina, and you can read the source here. I actually didn't read the entire story on my own. I was listening to my favorite podcast, The Read, and The Read brought this story to my attention. And as I was listening to it, I thought, oh my gosh, I have to tell my students that has everything to do with cultural psychology. So now I've read the story, but it was a story that was told to me. So this professor was extremely qualified. She was a bad bee. She was doing everything that professors need to do, and she applied to have tenure, and the University of North Carolina said no. They said exactly what you read about in the stock story on page 231, where it's this conversation between a professor and a student of color. And the professor is saying, well, we'll try our best. What else? They didn't really measure up, keeping it vague, and then saying, oh, well, maybe we'll hire a person of color. Maybe we'll hire a black professor next year or the year after that. But no, not this year. We tried. That happened. It's not only words on a page. That happened to a real life person, Nicole Hannah-Jones. She applied for tenure. They gave her the ring around and said no. Then, shoot, I don't remember exactly what happened, but it got some media press, probably because of social media. And then University of North Carolina said, oh no, people might think we're racist because we're being racist. Or, excuse me, people might think we're biased because we're not hiring this qualified woman full time. So let's fix our bias and hire her. And you know what she said? She said, too little, too late. I'm actually going to go to Howard University. You're only hiring me now because people are watching you. And because of social media, people now know they're exposed to the bias that is happening at this particular university. So deuces, I'm going to leave and go accept this full-time position at this black college university and make a difference there, because they don't seem to have any problem when it comes to hiring fully overqualified faculty of color. So anyway, check out her story. That was my paraphrasing. But I thought it was so cool that I'm reading about it from Richard Delgado, and then there's a person living it. What I would give to take her class. I would love to hear what she has to say about critical race theory. Okay, so that's an example of a stock story. What happens when people do get a chance to tell their counter stories? When you and I are running the world, we won't replicate this unfair system, will we? That's ridiculous. Of course not. Unless, of course, it changes us in the process. So you have the responsibility. Will you replicate the unfair system? Will you be ignorant of the bias, gender bias, ethnic bias, racial bias, ability bias? Now that you know better, you have the responsibility of doing better. Let's see, what was it that the artist from the critical race theory painting said? Oh, don't you worry, I'm gonna find it. The artist, whose name was Jonathan Harris, he said in our previous lecture on cultural products, if critical race theory is about acknowledgement and understanding of the way that systemic racism is structurally integral to our nation's history, the risk is that to ignore racism, to ignore bias, is to perpetuate it. So will you perpetuate it? You certainly will if you ignore it. But even if you don't ignore it, we run a risk of perpetuating it. Maybe it changes us. Maybe we get so jaded that we're like, oh, my decision doesn't matter. Let's just hire who we always hire. Your decision does matter. I believe it was Beyonce who said, yes, I'm bringing her back, if you feel insignificant, you better think again. Better wake up, because you're part of something way bigger. Stories are powerful because they not only help you, the person telling, they not only help the listeners, the people who are bonding over storytelling, they help the oppressed group because they help the oppressor. Counter stories can attack complacency. Stories can destroy, but the destruction they produce must be voluntary, a type of willing death. Because this is a white-dominated society, in which the majority race controls the reins of power, racial reforms must include them. Gotta be included. Their complacency, born of comforting stories, is a major stumbling block to racial progress. Counter stories can attack that complacency. When you feel complacent, you feel so content that you don't need to change. Like, change isn't necessary because things are just fine the way they are. Pardon me. Complacency you can also kind of think of it as like unwillingness to change because you're in extreme comfort zone. Which is why the people in power sleep well at night. Their conduct does not seem to them like oppression. Top of page 230. The cure is storytelling. Stories can shatter complacency and challenge the status quo. Stories can shatter complacency or attack complacency. And it's complacency that is a major stumbling block to racial progress. So, Paulo Freire said that we need to, let me not misquote him, go to my bookmark, because of course I have it bookmarked. Bottom of page 63, Occupied America, that was chapter 10. The great humanistic and historical task of the oppressed is to liberate themselves and their oppressor as well. So when we tell counter stories, we make people uncomfortable. It's like, hey, get out of your comfort zone and change these laws. Hey, get out of your comfort zone and close the gender pay gap. Hey, get out of your comfort zone and declare people born here as citizens, not when it is comfortable to you. Only the power that springs from the weakness of the oppressed will be sufficiently strong to free you. And that is a word for the day. Listening to stories makes the adjustment to further stories easier. One acquires the ability to see the world through others' eyes. It can lead the way to new environments. I certainly want a new environment. I think Dr. Martin Luther King wrote an entire speech. He had a dream about a new environment. That new environment's not going to happen if the people in power stay comfortable with exploiting the oppressed. So, power of stories as a cure, the power of stories to liberate us because we are at war, just like our stories. We liberate ourselves, we liberate others, and we create new windows into reality. Because we are not complacent, we are cycle breakers. And again, as a reminder, counter storytelling is one element of dismantling racism. Counter storytelling examines the relationship between race, racism, and power, and critical race theory challenges the dominant ideologies. Richard Delgado compiled this book and wrote this chapter because stories are the oldest, most primordial meeting ground on human experience. And because, page 239, this is a white-dominated society in which the majority race controls the reins of power, we got to challenge that. That's what we got to do. So, cultural products tell us about our communities, and we can use stories, histories, hopes, and struggles to challenge dominant ideologies. Do I feel confident to speak up against cultural appropriation next time I see it? Definitely this Halloween. And how do I get non-biased results from internet searching if Google is full of gender biases? These are the questions to ask. There is no right or wrong answer. I hope you know that we should tell stories because the therapy is to tell stories. Telling stories is therapeutic. Page 238. I hope you have a therapeutic rest of your day. Bye now.